Clayton's going to close out with a pretty in-depth look on high-speed planning. So closing wheels. How many of you still have two solid rubber closing wheels? Yeah. All right. Well, the first thing I'm going to, it's okay. But the first thing I'm going to recommend you doing, if you want to start putting some money in your planners, get rid of those and get some aftermarket closing wheels. We've done about 10 years worth of closing wheel research, and if you put all that together over time, the worst thing you can have on your planner, from Colfax, Iowa to Henderson, Kentucky to London, Ohio to Gibbon, Minnesota, is two solid rubber closing wheels. So we can get some better combinations. If you want good recommendations on those, we can talk one-on-one, but we've had great success with aftermarket closing wheels. It's one of the things you can do that gives you the best bang for your buck. And so we have some of those up here. The ones that are PFR proven on corn, and PFR proven as any product in practice we've tested for a minimum of 3 years. It gave us a positive yield advantage every year and an average positive ROI. So you can see on corn we're anywhere from 5 to 3 bushel gains on some of these aftermarket closing wheels. Soybeans, anywhere from almost 3 bushel down to 1 bushel gains for our aftermarket closing wheels. But once again, these are all compared to two solid rubber closing wheels when you see these yield gains. Now let's talk about not just the aftermarket wheels, but maybe some of the systems, the closing wheel systems that are coming out on the market. This is a Schaffner 4-link closer. What we like about it is it keeps the closing wheel assembly 100% independent of what the row unit's doing. It has some linkages, and so if your row unit hops or has some vibration in it, this has got its own suspension, if you will. So it'll keep it grounded better. In essence, you also need a little less manual down pressure on it, which is good to keep good ground contact at all times. You can also get this walking axle in case you have a lot of washouts and divots. This does a good job of making sure those wheels never lose contact with the ground. And you can see here, what we like to show once things are PFR proven from an equipment standpoint is acres to pay off. Okay, so we got 3 different commodity prices here for corn, 3 different planter row sizes, and those are the acres to pay off based off of what this system costs compared to our 4.3 bushel yield gain over the course of time here. So I like to show this because there's a lot of times we get to make an emotional decision and go, man, this is going to cost me like $12,000–$13,000 on my planner. I don't want to spend that. But if you look at it in a different way, and I just pulled that number out of my rear, that wasn't real. But if you look at it a different way here, and I say, look, it's going to take 800 acres of corn to pay this off, you start thinking, okay, well, this is probably a good investment, right? So that's how we want to do it. I want to take the emotion of the dollar sign out of it so that we make a good decision based off of actual data and not how much money we do and don't want to spend. Same thing on soybeans is your acres to pay off. Only 1.1 bushel. Like I said, there's anywhere from 1 to 3 bushel gains on a lot of this closing wheel stuff on soybeans, but because of commodity price, we're still for the most part looking at maybe a 1-year payoff, maybe a year and a half. So still really good investments on the soybean side of things. The Fast Track closing system is right here on the table. This is from Ag Focus. We get a lot of questions about, well, how do case closing systems stack up compared to two solid rubbers? We've never done that because we don't have case planners in our PFR fleet. And I'm not saying that system is exactly the same as a case closing system, but it's similar. Now, if I just took this system off and I put it on a standard row unit, I think we can see comparable data compared to what we had with the Fast Track system. But Case has a good system with everything they've got. This all works well together. Their gauge wheels are different. Everything on this row unit is a lot different than some other row units. So that's a system as a whole, which we've never really tested. But we have tested the Ag Focus, which is a similar type of closing system. So good success there compared to two solid rubber closing wheels once again. Same with soybeans, we're seeing around that 1 bushel gain, but pretty quick payoff when you start thinking about acres to pay off some of this equipment. Pretty quick returns, and then it's money in your pocket from there. Vertoforce is the newest closing wheel attachment that we are looking at system. It's a 2-stage system like these others where you're crumbling, moving that sole inward, and then you're having a second stage here that kind of packs that sole down, stitches it shut. But it's also, you can get it fully automated. Okay, so you hear that, it's fighting me. So you can set it so it has a certain amount of closing pressure down at all times, regardless of what you're going through. So it's going to constantly fight and pump air to it or release air. So it's got that perfect amount of pressure down at all times to remove air pockets, but not have too much pressure down and cause issues right at the tail end of that most important planter pass. So only 1-year data on this system so far, but it's pretty comparable to the other systems that I've been talking about. We need to get a couple more years under our belt with this. The other thing I like to mention on some of these automated systems, this and maybe hydraulic and downforce, is we're testing these in lots. You you take some of this field scale where you have more variability than what we do in the plots, you can expect higher gains, higher returns, quicker payoffs for automated systems in field scale scenarios of what we do in the plots. Questions on closing wheels? All right, starter systems. I'm specifically going to focus on starter on both sides of the road, 2x2x2 specifically. And this is all nitrogen-based data. So our standard practice in PFR for the last 5 or 6 years has been putting 30 units of nitrogen on one side, 2x2. And you can see a good demonstration of that picture here on your far left. So then we started, as these systems started being hit in the marketplace, of, okay, let's put starter on both sides of the road, whether that's the same amount or doubling that amount. And we start seeing some really big gains, okay? Now, if you're going to go from no starter, no nitrogen on with the planter, to say 60 units 2x2, that it ain't going to be 7 bushel. You're going to be up over 10 bushel gain going from nothing, right? So that 2x2x2 is compared to 2x2. And we're still seeing that kind of gains. And the picture right there shows it all. It's because of the preferential root growth. The other thing I always point out too is a lot of guys will say, well, what about one solid rubber closing wheel and one aftermarket closing wheel, more aggressive wheel? I do not recommend that, and we have tested that, and it shows the same thing we see here with starter. We get preferential root growth to that side that crumbles that sidewall better. We don't want that. We want a nice, robust, uniform root mass on these plants, and this is why. So this is 2x2x2 starter on both sides of the road for 4 years worth of data. Everybody's kind of looking at 2019 going, that was kind of a bummer. But in 2019, I think we all remember that. We wish we could forget. But all our plots were planted pretty late. There were actually very few things that gave us a return in our research in 2019, and this was one of those few things. So very consistent data across all the other years, other than that outline 2019. But for an average, that's a great return on investment for good starter on both sides of the road. And that data is a combination of a couple different systems. Conceal, Getter, and Martin have some systems, and all that data is crammed together in one, because when we tested all 3 of them, the results were pretty much exactly the same, regardless of whose system we were using. The practice of putting starter on both sides of the road in the soil was pretty much the same result in terms of yield benefit. But we're going to look at acres to payoff for some of these systems specifically. So the Getter Dual 2968s are down here on the far unit. Okay, and so this is the acres to pay off for that. It's one of the probably most cost-effective, I would say, of the systems that actually put it in the soil a little bit. But it is mounted between the gauge wheel and the closing wheel, so that if you have a lot of curves, how many of you have just straight shot fields? No curves, okay? So the challenge there with that type of system, the only thing I really don't like is when you're doing this, it's not always true 2-3 inches away, right, as you're doing those curves. So that's maybe a little bit of a pitfall there, but very, very quick acres to pay off with that system. Conceal for precision planting is right here. What I do like about this is the opposite of that one, right? So they all have their pros and cons, but this one's putting it right where you're dropping the seed, right beside. So no matter what you're doing there, it's always, this one's actually 3 inches over, but it's always 3 inches over no matter if you're doing some curves or not. So that's what I really like about that. Get a lot of questions from guys on, well, Conceal or some of these other ones, like, oh, I can't get it real deep. I can only get it maybe an inch or two. And true 2x2 or 2x2x2 is 2 inches down, 2 inches over from the seed, right? So I don't get hung up on that. My recommendation is just get it at least an inch. If you get it an inch in the soil, Mother Nature, most often than not, will do the rest for you. So get it an inch in the soil or as deep as you can, but don't get more nervous or upset if you can't get it 2 inches deep. An inch will be fine. What I don't really recommend is dribbling. We are doing a new study this year where we're looking at dribbling on top of the ground versus a system like Conceal that puts it in. But my recommendation will be is if this is the only way you'll do it versus doing nothing, then do this. But my recommendation, my ultimate recommendation is buy a system that can start it in the soil. Downforce. I'm going to go really fast on this one as well because Clayton's going to hit on it in the later half also. So spring, hydraulic, air. Who's got springs? What about air? Couple pneumatic. How about hydraulic? Okay, hydraulic's king for us for a lot of different reasons. This is my number 2 recommendation if you're going to look for spending money on that planter. After you've got aftermarket closing wheels, I want you to spend money on hydraulic downforce. Okay, one's because springs are not the way to go. They can't fully automated, changing on the fly as conditions fly, and air is not enough for these road units. It does not react fast enough. Once it does react to the reading, you're already in a different area that needs to be adjusted differently. So hydraulic is the only way to do it. It's the only way to do it quick enough, whether that's 5 mile an hour or 10 mile an hour. I recommend hydraulic, and I recommend that's the second thing you do. Reason being is you can spend a lot of money here on this meter, but if your row units are hopping a little bit, Once it comes out of that meter singulating, say 99%, if it bounces around in that seed tube at all or rolls a little bit, you've just lost a lot of money. You put a lot of money into this just to let it ruin your spacing because of some vibration or some popping there. So hydraulic downforce is very, very important. That's my number 2. And you can see yield data here. It's a PFR potential proven product for us as hydraulic downforce, meaning we need another year of data that's positive, and it could potentially become PFR proven. Pretty modest gains here, really, if you look at it, but really we need fully automated on the fly. But this is another one of those areas that I talked about earlier. If you take this field scale versus our nice plots, you're going to see 2-3x the results that we see here. The other thing I like to mention is what we tried to do is simulate a constant 50, 125, and 250 down pressure with springs, but we had to use the hydraulic cylinder to do it so that we didn't have to tear our planters apart right in the middle of planting. And so a 50-pound or 125 constant pressure with a hydraulic cylinder is actually a lot better than trying to replicate that with a spring. So those numbers would be even lower for the constant pressures if those were actually spring. So those are 2 things to keep in mind when looking at this data. This is a couple shots from our Ohio PFR farm. So once again, nice level, relatively uniform plots. 50 wasn't the right setting, right? But look at fully automated. In a plot scenario, okay, what about 125? Fully automated was still better, okay? So there's no one size fits all with hydraulic downforce. There's no way anyone can go out there and tell you, yeah, you need to be about 125 pounds all the time. You need fully automated hydraulic downforce to have the most success possible when it comes to downforce on a row unit. Okay, soybean data, once again, bushel or so there. That would be magnified if we're talking field scale research. Row cleaners, this is the one where we get a lot of questions as well. Do we need no-till coulters? Do we not? My recommendation is no, we do not. If you have the right set of row cleaners adjusted properly, there's no benefit to having a no-till coulter. Okay. The other thing too is tine style versus shark tooth. I like the shark tooth. I like having pneumatic air adjustment of some sort from the cab on these. With these. We also have Precision Planting's new Reveal row unit up here. We have no data on this, but it is mounted on one of these bars if you're interested in taking a look. This is our data so far, 2-year data on row cleaners. We've used Getter row cleaners for this research, and we do a control of no row cleaners, floating row cleaners, and 25 pounds down. Okay, so 25 pound down has been good for us. And I'm going to show you a couple reasons why. One, you want to get that residue out of the way, right? Heat up that soil, quicker, more uniform emergence. Don't have trash around that seed for poor germination, but also insect feeding. We've got a lot of slug feeding at most of our eastern PFR locations. So this is from our Atlanta location. You can see here no row cleaners, a lot of residue around that young plant. So the slugs will go underneath that residue during the heat of the day, survive down there. When it comes out and it's cooler, they're going to come out and do what? Eat that plant. Floating row cleaners, a little less residue there, and a little less feeding, but there's still some. Now we've got some constant pressure down, really moving that residue out of the way. It's cleaner, and there's no insect feeding. This is our two-year data on soybeans, so a couple of bushel here on soybeans. The other thing I like to mention on this, when we do our research, this is all no-till, by the way. The corn and soybean research is no-till row cleaner data. But with soybeans, we use RTK, we split down the stalk rows, right? Well, if you're planting anything on an angle going across those stalk rows, you absolutely have to put some constant pressure down on those row cleaners so they're not hopping, and you get a good, clean path in front of that row unit. Disc openers, I'm going to hit real quick on these. How many have tried or know about the STP disc openers? The serrated disc openers. So some people have tried them. We've got them down here on this tall harvest row unit. If you want to see them, they're a serrated blade. Okay, we've seen a constant 2 bushel gain on corn, close to 2 bushel gain on soybeans for these. That's pretty good. And it didn't matter whether it was conventional tillage or no-till, we saw roughly 2 bushel. This is both tillage practices put together in this data set because they were identical. Okay, we didn't break it apart. Which surprised me. I really thought we'd probably have better results in no-till and conventional tillage, but really very similar. Pros and cons of these is obviously they're sharp. They need to be sharp. One is a little bigger than the other, and so what happens is since one blade's bigger than the other, they spin at different speeds, creating a cutting action, and so they really need to stay sharp. So I've heard from guys that run them on a lot of acres, they wear out quicker than standard, but you can just replace the discs themselves. The hub and the bearing assembly is a lot more durable than the OEM disc opener, so a lot of guys like them. They say it doesn't bother me to have to change the discs out a little more often than I would normally do my OEM disc openers. But I've heard other guys say, I know I'm getting a bushel or two, but I don't want to be changing them that often. So if you're going to try these, I'd recommend doing them on a few rows first, see if you like them before you go and put them across the whole plant. Depth control. So we've got 4 years of multi-location data where 2 inches on corn is our optimum, right? But I'm not going to sit here and say this is PFR proven. There's no PFR proven stamp on this. I'm not going to tell you you need to plant corn at 2 inches all the time. How many of you plant the same depth every year on corn, all season long, every year? Probably none of us, right? Hopefully we're back there, we're changing, watching how much soil moisture we're having, and there's different factors that play into that, right? But what I can tell you is if you're looking for a good place to start every year and you've got adequate soil moisture, 2 inches is a great starting point for corn, and then adjust from there as needed. Soybeans, 1.5 inches. But let's take that to the next level and put some eyes in that furrow, okay? So we can use something like Precision Planting Smart Firmer to look at soil moisture. It reads a lot of other things, but soil moisture is one of my favorite things it can do. Because how many of you like when something red pops up on your planter monitor? Nope, none of us, right? So how many of you have planted on a day where maybe it's 80, 90 degrees and soil moisture probably changed throughout the day? A lot of us, right? How many of you got out during that day and changed your depth? Probably none of us, okay? So the first time we ran these in a field scenario, I planted for 3 or 4 hours that morning, ate some lunch, went back out, like, man, it has gotten a lot drier. Got in there, took off, and it was red now. My furrow moisture was red instead of green. So I'm like, okay, it's getting drier. Went back here, checked, and it had gotten a lot drier. Moved it down about a 1/2 inch deeper. Okay, took off, everything was good, it turned green, it said my moisture level was great. At emergence, you can see right where I went deeper. Right to it, right where I stopped. Same with the yield monitor. Yield monitor told the same story. Okay, but I would not have probably gotten out and changed that depth except for when I saw it on the monitor, right? So I think it's a great tool to have to help us make better decisions. But then we can take it to the next level. Precision has smart depth. So this can change on the fly. You can either manually, this one's hooked up as well. So the gauge wheels may not go up and down the same time as each other because they're up in the air. But it will adjust on the fly. So we can manually do it from the cab, or we can actually let it automate. And we can say, we can set parameters. Don't go any shallower than 1 inch. Don't go any deeper than 3 inches, and try to target a certain, say 35% soil moisture, and it will try to chase that moisture within that range you tell it to. Is that necessary? I don't know. It might be, but I really do like the fact of just at least having visibility of the cab that we're making the right decision on planting depth, and whether or not we need to automate it on the fly is probably another question, something we'll look into in the future. Last thing I want to talk about, seed orientation. So that's something that's been talked about for years. But all the data you'll ever find is suggesting 2 to 29% yield gains, okay? And all that is done by hand. Nobody has, to this point, had something mechanical that has done it on a planter. It's all been hand planted research. Small, really small replicated hand planted research. So we are working with a company called MK1 Engineering on AeroTube, and I'll show you it here in a minute. They told us to do 2 things. It orientate the seed flats only, so they can only do flats right now. They're working on the rest. It will orientate that seed with the tip down. Okay, so your root's going to shoot down, your shoot's going to go straight up. We're not going to do any curling action like the picture on your left there. So we're going to get quicker, more even emergence. And it's not going to take as much energy to get out of the ground. The other thing they said we would probably see is better leaf architecture consistency throughout the field as well, to capture more sunlight the second it emerges and those leaves start unfolding. So this is a picture of the AeroTube. I have one up here as well. It mounts in between the disc openers. You take your seed tube off. They have a seed collector that goes here, so the seed comes out of the meter, goes down this tube. Air, this is all done by air. So there's an air hose that goes here. The seed goes around, travels around this coil with the air pushing on it in a certain way to orient that flat seed tip down. And when we ground truth this, and this is one of the pictures from our plots, 90+% of the time, that tip was down. Okay, so this is given Minnesota. You can see on the left the standard seed tube, right, was AeroTube. What we saw in Minnesota, quicker, more even emergence, meaning the tip was down versus where it wasn't. Okay, but we went to Henderson, Kentucky, so we did this in Kentucky, Minnesota, and Indiana. At Kentucky, we didn't see a difference in emergence timing. It all came up about the same time, pretty much the same. But what we did see, and it's maybe a little hard to see in the picture, was that leaf architecture consistency with AeroTube versus more sporadic with the seed tube. So it's really awesome to be able to test a new technology like this and then actually do what they say it's going to do. So as far as I know, our Henderson, Kentucky location was the very first one that ever had a plot planted with a mechanical seed orientation device. Because with them, they had done it before, but it wasn't on the planter. So that our first location was when they had built their planter and actually put it in the soil, and we had really good success with it. So I'm excited to be working with them to help them. The thing you're not going to see data on this year. This isn't even beta testing. it's so new in development that we are just going to take the data, send it to them, so that we can help them get this better. They're also obviously working on other seed types, high speed, all those things are going to have to come into play later down the line, right? So once this gets closer to commercial availability, hopefully we'll test it, we'll show yield results. The one thing I did tell them, I'm like, look, if we're doing this, and I'm turning the data to you, which we normally publish everything we do, but I really wanted my hands on this. I said, we're going to take pictures of emergence. We're going to ground truth it, and no matter what happens on those pictures, I'm showing them. And they're like, that's fine, because it's going to work. And it did. So it's really awesome to see some technology like this in its infancy stage that actually works. It does work.
Thanks, Jason. Everything that Jason talked about in his presentation will carry over into mine, and we'll touch on those very briefly as we go through these. 3 things I want you to think about as I give my presentation. Number 1, capitalizing on a good planting date window. Regardless of corn or soybeans, we want to be targeting a window at the same time, so April, May, will be wrapped up by June. Number 2, making the good planting pass. So the same planting pass, you're going to make at 5 mile an hour. I want to replicate that at 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever speed you're comfortable planting with. Number 3, waiting on good conditions. So your all hands should all go up. On day 1, I know you pull your tractor and planter out of the shed, you're all ready to go. It's a touch marginal, isn't it? And you're trying to make that decision, should I wait a day or 2, or should I go ahead and start? With high speed, we're going to be able to make that time up. I think it's pretty important to plant on your planting conditions versus planting on calendar. Does anybody remember the year 2014? So this picture represents 2013. 2014, there was a conference put on by Precision Planting, and they unveiled Speed Tube, which is right here. And John Deere came out with their ExactEmerge system at the same time. They were saying that we're going to be able to plant and have a system to plant at 10 mile an hour. Anybody go to that conference? One guy right here. Is that it? I know my thoughts when I was in that conference, thought, no way, right? Kind of laughed inside, didn't believe it would work. And today I'm here today saying that it's probably quite possible. So that's after 2014. So we're not going to speed up that much, but we are going to speed up some. The unique position that I've been in, or Bex has been in, is that we're testing all 3 systems. So currently I have 2 years of Precision Planting Speed Tube data, and then we're working on year 1 for ExactEmerge and Ag Leader's SureSpeed system. So we're going to go through each of these here. The Speed Tube from Precision works alongside a VSET meter. Who runs VSETs today? Numbers aren't always as high as I think they'd be. I'm really surprised by that. I think they set the standard for meter technology. It's very hard to beat a VSET when it comes to simulation. Okay? It's a 12-volt system, so anything above 12 rows, you're going to need an alternator to help provide power for that system. Proven delta force. So we talked about the hydraulic downforce. It is an absolute necessity for high-speed planting. Delta force, I believe, was out for 2 years before they released Speed Tube. 2020 monitor. My dad got one of those things when they first came out, Gen 1. They weren't very fancy back then, but what they did, when you had an issue with your corn planter, they made you get out of the cab, didn't they? The other thing they've done is they've made all the competition get better too. If it wasn't for that monitor, I don't think we'd be where we are today. I didn't feel being able to map everything you do, being able to go back and look at before harvest what you planted where and what your performance was, I think is really important. $3,500 a row for Speed Tube, VSET meters, delta force, and all the harnessing to make this work, minus the display. So a 16-row planter is going to cost roughly $56,000. That's a quote that I got from Precision before I started my talks a week ago. John Deere's ExactEmerge. They come out about the same time as Precision's unit. It's right here. All their components are massive. So what I forgot to mention was Speed Tubes. They use them finger wheels at the top of this meter, or the top of this tube, to grab the seed off the disc. and it's going to toss it onto a cleated belt. ExactEmerge does not use any sort of system in between the belt and the meter. They utilize a brush that drives all the way down to the bottom. They use a dome-shaped disc instead of a flat disc. And it's going to drop the seed at the top of the disc versus the bottom. Who thinks the brush is a good idea? Anybody else? Yeah? Because it gives you infinite places to drop that seed, doesn't it? It's not going to affect spacing. If you get on the wrong side of the cleat and the other two systems, it could affect spacing, not as much as you would think. I still think it can happen. Their components are huge. They utilize a 56-volt system. And for most systems, I believe you have to use a PTO-mounted generator to provide the power for the system. ISO bus, so if you have John Deere Greenstar, like a 2630, it's got plug and play. No need for an extra monitor in the cab, which I think is a true advantage. $4,900 a row for the meter, the tube, and the downforce system to make all this work. But if you're a pre-ExactEmerge 5 unit, so anything before those two units sitting there, you're going to have to upgrade your shank. So they're not compatible with an XP or ExactEmerge Plus unit. So a 16-row retrofit is $78,000. Okay. The new kid on the block, I should say kids, AgLeader and Kinze. So they work together to make all the components. Okay, so all the mechanical components are made by Kinze. If you buy a Kinze planter from the factory, which is this unit right here, the harnessing is different and the electronics are different. The Kinze unit is going to use Ethernet cabling for their harness. AgLeader is going to make all their own components in-house, and they're going to use a CAN harness. The cool thing about their CAN harness is it is daisy chain from row to row. So if you have any issues, Kinze lift and twist planter is pretty hard to harness a lift and twist. You just replace one row with the harness. Pretty easy and quick to do. AgLeader reached out to me back in November and wanted me to test that system. And at that time, I was still managing a research farm, knowing that I was going to transition out of that over the winter. And I talked to my dad, and he was pretty resistant at first. He's not really into high-speed planning, didn't really care. But I thought it was pretty important for us to test this to give you guys unbiased information. So I pushed hard on the gas, and eventually he said yes. So we've got an 816 planter and a 1632 planter, and we went with the 8-row planter. Here's their system. So it's going to utilize a brush on top to grab that seed. The meter sits in the row unit perpendicular, so it sits in there like this, and then drops the seed out the bottom. They utilize a cleated belt, similar precision. You can see it in there. Pretty strong belt. You and I can have a ton of more, it wouldn't stretch at all. Pretty long row acre hours for that belt. The 1 point, we use it on a Kinze 3000 unit. These are the Kinze 4900 units here. They've got a very low, it's hard for you to see up there in the bleachers, a very low exit point. It's actually below the openers. The problem with the Kinze 3000 unit is we got to cut the bottom of the shanks off. So my dad was for this until I got the grinder out, and he don't want to do this. I cut one off anyway and did the rest. So we do have data for you. We're not data this fall. I'm pretty excited about that. There's a 24-volt system as opposed to 12. You got to use a generator to provide the power for the system. Low speed exit point talked about. AgLeader Integra. If you've used an Integra in the past, they're a great monitor. The InCommand 1200 that it takes to run this system is just an improvement upon the Integra. Very good monitor. And Agfinity, which is comparable to FieldView for precision or climate, is their cloud-based software that helps you map everything. I think it's pretty stellar as well. Cheapest of the three competitors, $3,300 a row, $52,800 for a 16-row planter. This is where we start to get the nuts and bolts of this. So I've got a few different tillage situations for this high-speed testing. This is what I'm going to call the garden field. Well, I will reference that throughout the talk. where it was worked right before we planted it. It was a replant scenario. The retailer accidentally killed our corn, and silver lining for me is I got another plot in the ground. Okay. You'll see the red area in the center of the field. That's where they had to replace a utility pole this year right before I planted it. You see the compaction. The downforce adjusted for that. You also see more red around the edge. This is a high-speed trial, so I've got 5, 7.5, and 10 miles an hour represented in this field, 22-acre field. What's the primary color minus the middle of the field and the end rows in that map? Is it green? A little bit of yellow? There's 5 acres of dark green in that field, which is negative 260 to negative 6 pounds of applied downforce. Who's got springs for downforce? Don't be shy. Okay. If I would have had 125 pounds of downforce in this field, would I had too much? Yes. So my dad would have argued with me 4 or 5 years ago that lift pressure doesn't matter. This is the only time you'd ever need lift is like a harvest unit there on the end with a box and I'm full of seed. I would 100% disagree with him. His 16-row planter has down pressure only, airbags, and not interforce. It does not adjust. He would have come into this scenario. We strip till a lot. This is not common for us. We had way too much down pressure. I only used 43 pounds of applied throughout the whole field, and that's all speeds. Okay? The one caveat to this, I think you need a little bit of compaction on your cage wheels for your openers. Provide good seed soil contact for your seed. And I have my closing wheels pressure too light. I should have increased that. So it's a little bit of a learning curve for me as well. My next tillage example, fall strip till. Case 5310 bar. We do not freshen the strips in the spring. My speed math on the left, dark green is 10, light green is 7.5, and red is 5. So you kind of see where my plot's at. It's will be the east side or the west side of the field. On the east side, it starts to get hilly and I slow down. Okay? Use 113 pounds of down pressure in that field. And that's applied pressure. This is my speed. The gray bars are gauge wheels. So that's what we're trying to achieve on gauge wheel load. So from 80 pounds of medium setting, I'm targeting 100 pounds of gauge wheel pressure. So if it's reading 80, the load sensor's in here on the Kinsey planter. If I'm reading 80 pounds, it's going to say I need more. If I'm reading 110, it's going to say I got too much. As I increase my speed, my applied downforce goes up. My gauge wheel downforce starts to slip. It's because I've got a 6130R. I start speeding up. I don't have the hydraulic capacity to pull this off. I'm maxed out. I think I'm starting to show the weakness of my tractor at 10 miles an hour. But I did increase my applied downforce. So my thinking always was higher speeds, more downforce. This is true. These are numbers that I can go back to this map, and with Agfinity I can query a whole pass. This will give me the average downforce, average singulation, all those numbers for that one pass. Really cool system. Cultivated with the rows. Stale seed bed. Worked a week ahead of planting. We waited on a rain. It got hard. We planted into it. Took 59 pounds of applied downforce. The next field will be southwest of this field. Worked on the same day. Planted the same day. Same conditions. Just cultivated on an angle. Took 30 more pounds of downforce. Both fields are pattern tiled. Is there a difference in map there? Absolutely. Do you think singulation will change from cultivating straight and cultivating on an angle? Got a lot of head shaking yes. It is. It does change. So these are hand counts, not monitor data. As I sped up, I lose a little bit of singulation at every speed. 10 miles an hour, I lose a percent. What's a percent worth? I don't know. Today is a cent, but we're going to find out. Okay? I think it's pretty important stuff here. Final stands. So disclaimer, we dug skips. So the first stand counts I took for the sure speed I flagged my stands. I never do that. I slept a few nights and got to thinking, I didn't dig my skips. I wanted to give credit to the planter for planting the seed. So I went back and I dug every single skip. So I usually run 6 replications for my high-speed trials. And I do span counts every single row twice for each speed. So I dug a ton of skips. I asked the Speed Tube team to do the same thing, the same Exact-Emerge team. The Exact-Emerge team, Aaron's in the back, he's a rock star, dug all skips, did a good job. The Speed Tube team, I think they left some skips out there. I think they gave up. Digging skips is an art. I think there's more stand here. I did Speed Tube past 2 seasons. I did not see this. So I think the numbers should be better than what they are. We planted that plot at 34,000 plants per acre. The Exact-Emerge at 35 and the Sure Speed at 33. Regardless of which system you choose, I think they're pretty gosh darn consistent. Same story when it comes to simulation. I gave credit to the skips that were planted and I found the seed for. The Speed Tube, we drop off a little bit as we increase our speed. I don't think that's the norm for it. I think my team let me down a little bit for the Speed Tube. Exact-Emerge, consistent as can be, 98.6 average. And then for Sure Speed was 98.99. I counted 21,000 plants by hand. 80 skips, I did not find seed for, and I bet 40 of those were there, I just missed them. The ag leader rep, my contact ag leader, came out to my first field after it emerged, 98.99 average, and he was disappointed. I'm pretty happy with 98.99 out of the ground. He wanted 100%. I said, you put an awful lot of weight on your seed genetics to get 100% out of the ground. So upon digging all my skips, I found seed that just didn't fire. I found seed that leafed out underground, and I found residue in the trench. The row cleaners are pretty important at high speed, just like they are at 5 miles an hour. Spacing. This is the ag reader. Any difference on spacing? Nailed it every time, regardless of speed. Standard deviation is very low there, close to 1, which means it did not deviate very much from the average. Okay, yield data. This is for Speed Tube only. I've got 2 years so far. 5 miles an hour with the standard seed tube is my control. 5 miles an hour with a Speed Tube is my first treatment. I gained a little bit of yield there. Not much, but I gained some. As I sped up, I lost some yield. So I lost 2 bushel an acre. I can gain those bushels back, I'm pretty sure. How? 5 miles an hour with a 16-row planter, I'm going to plant 17 acres an hour. As I speed up, I'm going to gain 50%. 8 mile an hour, 25 acres an hour. Okay? Who thinks I can plant more acres with a 16-row planter at 8 mile an hour versus the 24 at 5? Nobody's one guy. Smartest guy in the group. 10% increase over the 24-row planter. So I keep my planter. If I've got a good, strong row unit and a strong toolbar, I can plant faster and gain more acres than a 24 row. Days to plant 4,000 acres, 19.6 at 5 miles an hour and 12.3 at 8. So I gained 7 days. Gained a week. Who had a rough 2019? A few smirks, hands up over here. 2019 for Central Illinois was terrible. We didn't start planting the plots that year until June 3rd. So we're going to use these workable days from the USDA, whether you believe them or not, as our planting windows. So I had 4.5 in April, 5 in May, and 11.5 in June to get work done. Pretty tough year in 2019. I'm going to use these numbers going forward here. 17-year multi-location corn planting data from us. All it tells me there is I should be done planting corn before June. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. I'm going to lose 90% of yield. Soybeans, same window. Whether we plant both at the same time or I try to get more acres planted faster, I think we can win both ways. We need to be done planting before June, otherwise we're going to lose 15% on soybeans. This is where it starts to get a little bit long, so hang with me. 5 miles an hour. Those USDA planting date windows are what I'm going to use for this data. I'm going to plant 916 acres of corn, 12-hour days, 5 miles an hour. I know you're going to work more than 12-hour days, but I had to stick to a number. Second window, I'm going to plant 1,000 acres of corn. Third window, in June, I've still got a little bit of corn to plant all of my beans. Am I going to win that way? I'm not. I speed up to 8 miles an hour. In June, I've only got 905 acres of beans left to go. Okay? Who thinks I'm going to pay off the system with corn in 1 year? Not quite. I did figure in the yield loss for high speed, a 2 bushel number. That's in my math. 622 corn, that's my local bid for my elevator for this growing season. Average per month from March till a week ago. And then 1492 on soybeans. I got a pretty good basis where I'm at. Just for corn, the advantage is $31,000. 2 years, 4,000 acres, I'd pay that system off. However, soybeans, those are almost unbelievable numbers. It's pretty hard to stand up here and give those numbers. But this could happen on your farm. Potentially, the potential is there, for sure. Now, if I speed up to 10 miles an hour, you might think, well, I don't want to plant at 10. Once you start planting at 8, you'll try to go faster, if you've got the ground conditions to do so. I was planting my inrows. I live in some rough country. I was planting my inrows at 8. So if I go to 10, I'm going to almost pay that system off in 1 season. I can take long vacation on those numbers. So both crops, pretty good return on investment there theoretically. I think these can be real numbers on your farm. So on my farm, my dad's farm, I think it would pay dividends this year. My planting date window this year is from April 25th to June 6th. We should have been done in May. I think we would have cut a week off. Our windows this year were 2 days of planting, 3 or 4 days of light rain, just enough to keep us out. It was rough. I think it would have paid dividends. When I got done, remember how my dad was against doing this system. He said, we wish we would have put it on the 16-row planter. So experience here, I think it'll work. Jason loves doing puzzles. So we did puzzles at our last team meeting. And these are the pieces of the puzzle, I believe, in my opinion, you're going to need to be successful with high-speed planting. So start putting that puzzle together here. RTK guidance or good guidance. I cannot get RTK where I'm at without having a base station I carry around with me. The ground's too rough. Horsepower. I struggled with that one this year. I was supposed to have high-speed 15-inch beam data this year. Not going to happen. I dropped those splitters in the ground. I got above 80-degree temps, and I wore that tractor down. I didn't have the HP to do so. Didn't have hydraulic capacity. High-speed delivery system. You have to have one of these and hydraulic downforce to make this work. I will not recommend planting above 5 mile an hour with the regular C2. It won't work. Look at our data from 2020, and you'll start to see why. Jason talked about fertilizer with the corn planter. It's tough to tend to those high rates of fertilizer at 5 mile an hour. Imagine 7, 8, 9, 10. So that might be a reason not to do high speed. I'm a believer in 2x2x2. I think it would be rough to do it 10 mile an hour. Is it possible? Yes. But run through those logistics in your head first. Hydraulic capacity, I struggled with my tractor this year. I've got to do something different. Think about that before you make the investment. If your tractor doesn't have the capacity to do so, you might be spending more money than you want to. Crop maintenance. Do you think we're going to wear out our planter row units or have to maintain them more often at high speed? I think so. We're changing openers faster, bearings faster, hydraulic downforce we talked about, durable row unit. If you don't take anything from me, this whole talk, this is what I'm going to take away. John Deere 7200 row unit, about as old as I am. Precision says we can't retrofit their units on to 7200. I'm going to say don't do it, because it's been used for very little for high speed. I've got a crack right here that I've welded back shut, right above the gauge wheel pins. It's cracked at the openers all the way around the weld. And you'll see there where the openers have rubbed the shank. Your opener should never be rubbing the top side of the shank. Cannot handle high speed. I'm unsure if it can handle hydraulic downforce. So you got to have a durable road unit and a durable toolbar to make this work. Adjustable rope cleaners, you got to have them. Good field conditions. I think now you can wait for them, because you're going to make the makers up pretty fast. And then aftermarket closing wheels. We'll finish this up with a video of the exact emergency system going through the field this year. Jason was lucky enough to do a few passes with it. This is in no-till. It's pretty cool that we've got all three systems and we're testing every tillage situation that we can. So now we can open up to you guys. You can ask questions for where you sit now. If you'd like to wait to the end and talk about any of these toolbars we have up here, feel free to. Jason, I'd like to thank you for listening to our hot air this afternoon and teaching you a little bit something.
All right, so that was everything planners we had in 50 minutes. What did we miss? What questions do you have? Insecticide. In terms of granular on the planter? Liquid insecticide. What question around that?
Are you putting it in the seed firmer or just like a brewer situation? So kind of all those things.
Yep. So if any of you were on tour 2, we've got a block of long-term corn after corn. It can't be long-term corn after corn anymore. There's a bunch of rootworm damage in there. It had a full rate of force granular at planting, and we still got a bunch of damage out there. So obviously there's a couple ways you can do it. You can use the banded dry fertilizer boxes right there on the planter. You can use the dry products, or you can do like a liquid bifenthrin type of really high rate. I think the dry, force and some of those will be better option than maybe what you can get with liquid control, even at the higher rates, but those are options. So like capture bifenthrin through the seed firmer and furrow. Rotating crops. For us, we're going to have to go back to put beans in that block, and we're probably not going to take any of the blocks on this farm because the pressure's so high. More than 2 years of corn before we put a bean rotation in. We're not going to be able to get good data here if we keep doing that.
I think Precision could probably do it with their meters tied into their electric. As far as liquid goes, so I manage the El Paso farm, and we had a room issue there in 2020. And we did run liquid this year, and we did do it at high speed. So I didn't have any problem.
Liquid can definitely be done at high speed.
To the firmware.
Like Clayton said, the technology has kept it. Precision can most definitely do it, but they've got the electric metering systems for the dry boxes. They can 100% definitely do it at high speeds at the rates we need to. And liquid. We're pumping 60 units of nitrogen. We're doing 20, 30 gallon units of nitrogen pretty quickly. And at Indiana, we did I think up to 15 gallon at 10 mile an hour. Easy, but sometimes it takes a pump system, a couple of dual pumps. It can all be done for sure. There's the technology to do it. You just got to figure out what do you want to use, what rates you want to run, and what are the products and technologies out there to be able to do that. Exact rate on deer, I can pretty well guarantee you it's going to be able to do that too. Good question though. Anything else for the group? Yes, sir.
When you're no-till, do you have to drive slower than when you're in conventional field?
That's a great question. When we're doing no-till versus conventional with this high speed, we have to drive slower. For us, like at Indiana, with the video you saw, that was 10 mile an hour. There was no difference in stand, singulation, good ride, any of that from 10 to 5. So in that field, we didn't, but we also didn't go in there and harvest it when it was a little bit, iffy. We didn't have grain cart, ruts, tracks. So I hate to sound like a field agronomist and say it depends, but it does, right? But you're going to feel that. You're going to know that tractor feel, right? If you took the grain cart across and you left some tracks, when you get up to that, you may have to throttle back to 7 mile an hour and gear it back up to 10, right? It's not going to be that area where you're going to be 10 mile an hour all the time or 8, but 10 mile an hour is 100% doable in no-till situation if you didn't screw it up the pole or you didn't track it up or whatever it may be. The other thing I would like to see technology to where the tractor varies its tied to the planter in the good ride and it varies its speed. But the problem is when it's reading it getting a little rough, by the time the tractor probably slows down, I don't know how, but that would be pretty cool if they could come up with tying the tractor in with the planter at high speeds to vary that speed based off of the ride. And it may be able to do it because it may be some kind of sensing on the tractor that senses, oh, that was a little rough, I better slow down because the planter's getting ready to go through it. So honestly, that would be probably a pretty slick technology to have to where you don't have to automate it. It does it itself. Good questions, though. But yes, that's the first thing when we start high-speed research. The number one thing people kept saying, I can't do it, I know it. I can't go 10 mile an hour, I know it. Yeah, you can. If you have the planter set properly, you have the hydraulic outputs, you have everything on that planter you need to be able to do it, yes, you can. And we've done it successfully many times.
You have to scout harder on your paddock pass.
Yeah.
Through my experience, you have to scout harder. The fall strip till is as close as I can get. So I would check my depth at 5, check at 10. If I'm equal, closing's the same, good to go.
Any other questions? All right, well, Clayton and I will stick around for another 15, 20, 30, however long you guys want to stick around. We'll answer any questions one-on-one. You can come up, look at stuff, and talk about anything you want. So thank you all for coming. Have a great day.